Hi everybody, welcome to this revision webcast, which is going to be looking at the key aspects of the price mechanism, the kind of interaction between supply and demand in different markets. Hopefully in the next 15 minutes or so I can take you through some good examples, some useful revision which basically tries to cement your understanding of the underlying supply and demand economics. Lots of price mechanism use, always you can find. For example, the price of oil is collapsing earlier on this year, falling from more than $100 a barrel to less than 50. It's picking up again now. It's probably above $60, but clearly a change of that magnitude, a halving of the world price of oil, is a significant price change and one which is going to affect businesses all around the world. Worth probably revising the oil market ahead of your exams. And it doesn't just have to be oil. Typically, examiners like to ask questions which look at different industries, but typically markets where the price has changed, where something has happened. There's something where you can use your supply and demand theory, both in analysis and also in terms of evaluation. So, for example, the potash cartel. Potash is used in making fertilizer. Well, that cartel has collapsed a couple of years back and has led to a fall in the price of potash. And then one thinks about the consequences of that for farming and for the potash mining sector. So what I thought I'd do is just take you through two main elements in this presentation. First of all, let's revise quickly, hopefully fairly straightforwardly, the shifts in market demand and supply and how they affect the equilibrium in the market. In our first example here, we see an outward shift of the market supply for a product. And it's a good idea in the exam, but always please to draw to the axes, dotted lines to show price and quantity. Try and keep the number of arrows to a minimum, but we see here an outward shift of supply, and that should bring down the market price eventually because of a surplus of production. And we move down the demand curve, there's an expansion of demand, and we move along the x-axis, there's an increase in the quantity produced in equilibrium. So that's an outward shift of supply. Conversely, we could see a fall or an inward shift of demand. So in this case, the demand curve is shifted to the left. That causes prices to go down in the market. And if the price is lower, then we expect to see a contraction along the supply curve to a lower equilibrium quantity Q2. This example here, our next slide, the market supply has shifted to the left. There's been a fall in supply, decrease in supply, perhaps, for example, caused by an increase in cost. And the consequences of the market price goes up, the equilibrium price increases, and at higher prices we expect to see a contraction up the demand curve. Fewer consumers can afford the product, so we see higher prices, P2. We also see a fall in the equilibrium quantity. Tiny exam point here, but a lot of students focus a lot in their explanation on changes in price, and that's good. Keep doing that. But reading the examiner's report, so again, many students fail to just nail the explanation by talking about what the effect of a shift in supply and demand is on the equilibrium quantity. So tip for the exam when it's coming up, explain and show the changes in both price and quantity to nail the analysis marks on the diagram. Now, final little shift curve, we can sometimes get a shift in demand. In this case, the demand curve is shifted out to the right. We don't necessarily move straight away from one equilibrium price to another. So let's start at equilibrium A with a price P1. The demand shifts out. The demand shifts out from D1 to D2. And if the quantity stays at Q1, then that's going to cause the price to shift up to point B. The level of demand is high enough for producers to be able to increase their price. Ultimately, of course, the market should respond to this higher price by a supply up the supply curve, so an expansion up the supply curve. So whilst the price may initially jump up to B, eventually we'd expect to see a movement up the market supply curve, an expansion of production to a new equilibrium point C. That gives us a price of P3, and we also see a rise in the equilibrium quantity to Q2. Sometimes in the exam, you may get more than one change in the conditions of supply and demand. And this is something to keep in mind when you're focusing in the exam hall. If you think there are two shifts, there's a supply shift perhaps and a demand shift, then you're going to need a good large size diagram to show this clearly. Another example, we've taken a product here where the demand curve is shifted out from D1 to D2, increase in demand. But the supply curve has also shifted out from S1 to S2. Notice here that the shift in supply is greater than the shift in demand. So the consequence of that, compare the original equilibrium A, D1 meeting S1, with C, meeting D2 meeting S2, the consequence is that the price actually goes down in the market from P1 to P3. The supply side shift has been greater than the demand side shift, resulting in a fall in the equilibrium price. However, both factors cause the quantity bought and sold to rise. And again, in the exam, please ensure you talk about the change in quantity as well as the change in price. Sometimes you'll get some data and you'll be asked to explain what might have happened. So here's a question on the market for beef. What's been happening in this industry is that the price that consumers have been paying for beef has been going up. It's risen from a little over £6 per kilogram to nearly £7.50 as shown by this table. And so you may be asked to explain, well, what might have caused this? What demand factors and what supply factors might have explained higher beef prices? I'm sure you can probably think of some already. On the demand side, it could be the case that substitutes to beef have become more expensive. So, for example, if the price of chicken or lamb has increased, some consumers will shift out of those products towards beef, increasing the total demand for beef in the market. Might also be the case that incomes have gone up. The real income of consumers has increased. And if the income elasticity of demand for beef is positive, again, that would increase the total demand. And it could have been there's just been a change in tastes and preferences reflected in consumer spending in the market. There would be three demand factors. And there could also have been some supply factors. So we know, we're told that the price of beef has gone up. Perhaps it could have been that the cost of producing beef has increased. And I've listed here in my second bit of the slide some of those cost increases. Perhaps, for example, the price of animal foodstuffs has increased, or that beef farmers are having to pay higher rents for their land and for their buildings. It could be the case that workers employed in the industry are being paid higher wages. Either way, what the examiners are looking for you to do is for you to show your understanding about the supply and the demand factors that could have caused the price change that you've been shown. Okay, the price of beef has increased by around 25%. That's a significant increase, and so something must have been happening in the market. How do we show this on the diagram? Again, I advise nice, big, clear diagrams. We're showing here that the demand for beef might be pretty inelastic. It's shifted out from D1 to D2. And I've also shown on my diagram that there's been an inward shift of supply from S1 to S2. You take those two shifts together, that would be the original equilibrium price, and that would be the higher price following an increase in demand and a fall in supply. Now, there's a mistake with this diagram, or a limiting factor here, that I haven't shown the quantity. The total quantity in the market would go up because it looks as if the shift in demand has been greater than the fall in supply. But this would be a good example of how you could use your basic AS micro supply and demand theory to explain what's happening in the market. It's a nice, easy way of summarizing changes in equilibrium prices. You just need to understand what tends to happen if there's a demand change or a supply change. I advise you in final revision to practice your diagrams, think about how you're going to draw them quickly and well, and crucially, as it says at the bottom of this slide, think in the exam, think carefully about what the extracts are telling you about the relevant supply-demand factors. Pick them from the extract, apply the ideas, and I think you'll be in good shape when it comes to answer those questions. Let's move on to the second part, and that's just briefly to look at what are the key functions of the price mechanism. Price mechanism is a phrase or concept used to describe how the market allocates scarce resources amongst competing users. And it's important to be aware of some of the main functions of the price mechanism. We live in a mixed economy. We have a state that taxes and spends and provides, but we have the bulk of resources allocated by the private sector. And so the price mechanism is an important feature of economics, certainly in the UK and many other countries. This slide just summarizes for you the 4 key functions of the price mechanism. So markets are very powerful, and they do kind of oftentimes quite amazing things. They allocate scarce resources amongst competing uses. They ration goods and services, particularly when the demand outstrips supply. I'll give you an example of that in a second or two. Really important point, point number 3. The price that you have in the market, it sends an important signal, very important signal, both to producers and consumers. And when those prices change, price changes create changes in incentives, either on the supply side, should we produce more or less, or on the demand side, should we consume more or less. So these are key words here: allocation, rationing, signaling, and incentives. And if you're using these words in your exam answer, then you're sending a signal to the examiner that you understand how the price mechanism works. Let's just look at a couple of examples here, hopefully to help you with your revision. So let's take the rationing function. Essentially, this function says that when something is in high demand, or when there's a limited supply, then the price goes up, and that is an immediate means by which some consumers are unable to purchase the products because they don't have enough real income to be able to afford it. Economists have a concept called effective demand. I'd like to buy something, but do I actually have the purchasing power in the market to be able to be an actual or an active consumer? So another example here, I've shifted the supply curve to the left. The price has gone up from P1 to P2. And so, for example, if as food prices go up, or if the price of an essential item goes up, fewer people are willing and able to buy it, even if the demand is inelastic. And there are lots of good examples of the rationing function at work. Food prices, obviously, topical issue at the moment, particularly with the rise of food banks. We've done a previous webinar on the housing market. So we know that the cost of renting property has increased significantly, and that's definitely affecting affordability. The surge of interest in and use of auctions as a way of sorting out who's willing to pay for different products. And take big major events, be they sports events or festivals. Clearly the price there is a way of rationing who's able to attend. The signaling function, I think, is really quite important. If I was to emphasize one of these functions, it would be the signaling effect. So when there's a change in the price, that actually does send very important information to both producers and consumers in the market. And loads of good examples. The price of coffee affects how much one might plant and aim to produce in future time periods. Big topical issues at the moment about whether or not we should be investing in shale oil and gas. The fracking debate is controversial, highly topical. I suppose that depends a little bit on the price of the oil and gas you're going to extract. Stock market sends important signals, and so too the price of things like interest rates on loans. And here's a good example, just taking a little extract. Oftentimes they'll give you an extract in an exam and test your economics. So we're told in this extract from the turn of the year that cotton farmers are being affected by a severe fall in price. That's mainly because of the weather causing the supply of cotton to surge. So global prices are at a 5-year low, but Chinese farmers are the recipient of a government-style buffer stock scheme where the government is committed to buying up surplus stocks of cotton at a minimum price. And China now, as a result of this, has seen a huge rise in its reserves of cotton, and it now holds 60% of all the cotton stocks. So whilst Chinese farmers appear to have benefited from the intervention, cotton growers in Zambia are suffering because the world price has collapsed. And this is an industry which employs a very high percentage of the population. Their profits, their incomes, and ultimately jobs and living standards are under severe threat. So oftentimes the price signals, the price changes will affect different countries in different ways. And crucially, the government may intervene in the market to offset global price changes. Here's another example, an extract. Become used to, become familiar with the extracts you get given, because then you'll do well in an exam. So we're told that the price of premium virgin olive oil has risen to over $4,000 a tonne, the highest for 6 years. There's been a drought in Spain, fruit fly infestation in Italy. So clearly there's been a supply side change there, and these are the two dominant producers. And it says, look, if prices remain high, consumers may switch towards cheaper substitutes, such as soya, palm, and rapeseed oil. So there's a lot of economics in there which the examiners could test, the types of questions they might ask. They could ask you to explain why the price of olive oil has gone up. And so immediately, instinctively, you should be thinking about the diagram that you would use there, the inward shift of supply, creating a scarcity, and that drives up the price of olive oil. And particularly if demand's inelastic, that's going to cause a significant price rise. There's no diagram on this slide, but can you visualize that diagram in your mind? The inward shift of supply leading to a big price rise. Can you visualize the inelastic demand? If you can, you're in a good place ahead of the exam. And another question, to what extent, a discussion question, an evaluation question, to what extent might that increase in the price of olive oil actually turn out to be an increase in the cost of oil in the supermarkets? In other words, will the cost of the raw product, if you like, will it be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices? And in theory, there's no reason why it shouldn't be. Very, very few processing costs, and once you've extracted the olive oil and bottled it and things, you should be able to get the product to market pretty quickly. But on the other hand, it could be the case that the other supply costs in the market are falling. So you drop the ceteris paribus assumption. So well, actually, it could be that they're becoming more efficient at distributing the products. The bottling costs might have gone down. Maybe wage costs per unit of output have fallen. Who knows? So the other costs may have fallen, an offsetting factor. It could be the case that the supermarkets actually involved in a price war with each other. For example, Waitrose and Tesco and Sainsbury's competing with Aldi and Lidl. They may decide, actually, well, we'll keep the price of olive oil constant because we don't want to lose market share, and we'll take a little bit of a hit on profit. And it could also be the case, of course, that if olive oil is priced in dollars, as it is in the extract, or euros, it could be the case that the exchange rate changes. So olive oil is priced in dollars here, and it might be the case that the pound is rising, appreciating against the dollar, in which case actually the cost of olive oil in UK supermarkets might actually be pretty much the same. So the top question on this slide would be an analysis question, inviting your understanding of the price mechanism at work. The second question would be asking you to think about the extent to which this analysis change you've described actually does lead to higher prices in the market. Another final example is instead of looking at commodities, let's look at a service. So we know, for example, that the total number of films that have been taken out for rent in the UK market has basically collapsed. You can see from this table that in 2013, only 1 million films are being rented in retail stores, the likes of Blockbuster and others, many of whom have gone bust, way down on previous times. And again, so there's a kind of price mechanism at work here. Why is it happening? Well, must have something to do with the cost of a substitute. And in this case, the cost of fast broadband has gone down, quicker to download a film. Clearly that changes people's decisions and preferences. Could be the case, for example, that people, instead of renting films, they actually want to go see films, for live in the cinema. Sounds bizarre, but people still do that. They want to see a massive digital screen. Of course, a lot of cinemas have been investing big time in huge digital screens. Lots of View cinemas have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this. And cinemas have also become quite savvy and quite successful in how they price tickets for different groups at different times of the day to attract people in, for example, at non-peak times. And of course, going to the cinema is a substitute for renting the film for most people. Finally, it could be the case that people's income has just gone up, And we might actually say, well, that table showing rentals is the idea that film rentals, as opposed to owning your own film or going to see it live, that film rentals are actually an inferior good with a negative income elasticity of demand. Either way, here's a market. They'll give you some data on what's been happening, and all the examiners are looking for, all they're hoping for, is that you can use your supply and demand theory to apply it well and show your understanding of what's going on in the sector. Okay, so what are my key takeaway points in terms of the price mechanism and the sort of questions that you might get? I think it's really important, everybody, to revise thoroughly what are the main conditions of demand and the main conditions of supply. Understand which factors cause shifts in which curves. That's a very important point. Once you've done that, you can then use your diagrams to show and also explain the causes of changes in prices. And as I've emphasized in this session, always explain the effect on equilibrium quantity. Don't always focus just on price. Very important to think about and be aware of the different functions of the price mechanism: rationing, signaling, incentives, allocation. And crucially, think about the interrelated aspects of markets. So a change in the price of one product can actually sometimes have quite a powerful effect on the demand conditions in related markets, for example, for substitutes and complements. My final point is that if I was revising for the exam, which by the way I'm not, but if I was, then I'd revise market theory first, supply and demand theory and the price mechanism, because once you have a good, solid understanding of that, it makes it much easier to think about how markets, instead of working well, how markets fail, and then how the government might choose to intervene in a particular circumstance. This has been a revision webcast on aspects of the price mechanism, and I hope you found it useful with your revision. If you want to keep the conversation going, please follow me on Twitter. I'm on tutor2u_econ, or just follow the rest of the economics team on Twitter as well. And I look forward to meeting up again for future webcasts in the near future.